I am Anna Day, 29 years old, a U.S. Army captain who just returned from the Middle East war zone for Christmas. But the real battlefield wasn't in the desert. It was right in my mother's oak-paneled dining room. The climax hit at 7:47 p.m., when I refused to give up my late father's chair at the head of the table to my lazy sister. Frank, my stepfather, reeking of expensive liquor, lunged at me. He didn't talk sense. He used the dead weight of a 200-pound man to knock over the chair I was sitting in. I fell, slamming my hip against the floor, cranberry sauce splattering onto my sacred Class A uniform. He sneered, pointing a finger in my face. "In this house, money is rank, you tax-leeching toy soldier." My mother and 23 relatives just silently lowered their heads and kept eating. They thought I would cry or fight back. But they were wrong. As I stood up and brushed myself off, I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked onto a different target. The phone he forgot to lock on the table, holding the secret to his debt and fake military shipments. Comment, justice, and subscribe to the channel right now if you believe that. Someone who insults the uniform and betrays their family deserves an ending behind bars. To understand why I didn't strike him back right then and there, you have to understand the room I was sitting in. 3 hours before the incident, the air in the house was thick. It was the typical Northern Virginia holiday party. Expensive, loud, and suffocatingly fake. I sat in the middle of a dining table that cost more than most soldiers make in a year. The centerpiece was a sprawling arrangement of winter holly and silver candles, but it couldn't hide the rot underneath. I was wearing my Class A uniform, the dress greens I had earned with sweat and grit. The bronze star on my chest, awarded just 2 weeks ago for a logistics operation that saved a platoon, felt heavy. But at this table, it meant nothing. All eyes were glued to Brittany. My 22-year-old half-sister was busy staging an unboxing video for her Instagram story right at the dinner table. "Oh my God, you guys, look!" Brittany squealed, holding up a tangerine-colored Hermes Birkin bag. She posed, pursing her lips. "It smells like success? Thank you, Daddy." "It suits you, Princess," Frank boomed, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson from the single malt scotch he'd been guzzling since noon. "That's genuine leather. Costs 12 grand. More than what this one makes in a year." He jerked his head toward me without making eye contact. "Playing in the sand." A ripple of polite, sycophantic laughter went through the relatives. My aunts and uncles, people who claimed to love the troops on Facebook, chuckled along. They knew Frank's logistics company was rumored to be in trouble. I knew for a fact he was dodging taxes because I'd heard him bragging to his lawyer on the porch earlier about using charity write-offs to trick the IRS. It was a common game for the new money crowd in D.C., and it made my stomach turn. "Frank," I said, my voice steady, the same tone I used to brief generals. "Brittany's tuition is late. Mom told me the roof was leaking last week. Is the purse really the priority?" The table went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Frank set his glass down hard. The ice cubes clinked, a sharp, lonely sound against the crystal. "Don't lecture me on finance, Anna. You live on government handouts paid by my taxes. I create wealth." He stood up, swaying slightly. "Brittany, honey, come sit at the head of the table. The lighting is better for your video." "That's Dad's chair," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a statement of fact. My father, Colonel Day, had sat there every Christmas until the cancer took him. It was the one boundary I had left in this house. "Your dad is dead," Frank spat, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "And I paid for the chair. Move." "No." That was the trigger. It happened at 1947. I checked the grandfather clock as I fell. Frank didn't just pull the chair, he threw his weight into it. Gravity and malice took over. I hit the floor hard. The pain in my hip was blinding, a hot spike shooting up my spine. But the sound was worse, the shattering of the crystal serving bowl. Cold, sticky cranberry sauce exploded over my chest, soaking into the fabric of my uniform. It looked like a gunshot wound. I lay there for a second, the breath knocked out of me. The room was frozen. I looked up through the legs of the table, directly at my mother. Mom, Helen, was sitting 3 feet away. She was clutching her pearls, her knuckles pale. This was it. This was the moment. Her husband had just assaulted her daughter, an officer of the United States Army, in her own home. "Mom," I whispered. Helen looked at me. Then she looked at Frank. Frank was wiping a smudge of cranberry sauce from his hand onto a silk napkin with a look of utter disgust, as if I were the one who had soiled him by falling. "Anna," Mom said, her voice trembling, but not with rage, with annoyance. "Please, don't ruin the atmosphere. Just get up and apologize to Frank. He's had a long week." She turned back to her plate and speared a piece of roast potato. Something inside me died in that moment. The part of me that was a daughter, the part that craved a mother's love, turned to ash. The pain in my hip faded, replaced by a cold, metallic clarity. Situation report: hostile environment. No allies. Mission: survive and destroy. I remembered the words of General Mattis. Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet. I didn't cry. Soldiers don't cry when the enemy reveals their position. I slowly pushed myself up. My hip throbbed, but I stood at attention. I brushed a glob of red sauce off my ribbon rack. "My apologies, Frank," I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a quartermaster assessing a broken supply chain. Frank grunted, satisfied. "Know your place." He turned to pour another drink, turning his back on the table. But in the chaos amidst the spilled sauce and the broken glass, he had made a fatal error. He had left his phone on the table, screen up, next to his plate. The notification light blinked. A text message preview popped up. I looked down. My eyes locked onto the screen. Sender: Logistics Hub 4. Message: Ghost shipment cleared the Norfolk port. No inspection. Transfer the remaining $50K immediately. My heart rate didn't spike. It slowed down. My vision narrowed. This wasn't just a toxic stepfather anymore. This was a crime against the Department of Defense. In one smooth motion, practiced 1,000 times in briefing rooms, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't make it obvious. I pretended to check a notification. Snap. I captured the screen. High definition. Irrefutable proof. I looked at my mother one last time. She was chewing her potato, eyes fixed on the centerpiece, refusing to witness the wreckage of her family. "I'm going to clean up," I said softly. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I walked with a limp, holding the phone like a weapon. I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was moving to a secure location to call in an airstrike. They thought they had broken me, but they had just handed me the coordinates to their destruction. I retreated to the guest bathroom, the only room in the house where the lock actually worked, and wetted a paper towel. I scrubbed at the cranberry stain on my dress greens, but the red dye had already soaked deep into the fabric. It looked less like a food stain and more like an old, unhealed wound. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, the anger I felt wasn't just about tonight. Tonight was just the symptom. The disease had started 10 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday in November. I closed my eyes and the smell of expensive scotch faded, replaced by the smell of wet earth and white lilies. I was 19. The day we buried my father, Colonel Day, the rain wouldn't stop. It was a proper military funeral. The folding of the flag was precise, the gun salute was deafening, and the sound of taps drifting over the cemetery hills broke whatever was left of my heart. That was the day Frank Morrison made his move. He wasn't family then. He was just a business associate of my father's, a man who showed up in a suit that was a little too shiny, driving a car that was a little too loud. While I stood by the grave, numb and shaking, Frank didn't stand with the respectful distance of a friend. He stood right behind my mother. I remember looking up and seeing his hand resting on her shoulder. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was heavy, possessive. Like a man staking a claim on a piece of prime real estate that had just come onto the market. "Don't worry, Helen," I heard him whisper to my mother, his voice oily. "I'll take care of the logistics. You just grieve." He took care of the logistics, all right. Within 3 months, he had moved in. Within 6 months, he had married her. And then, the erasure began. It started slowly, like a creeping mold. First, Dad's collection of military history books disappeared from the living room shelves, replaced by Frank's collection of single malt scotches. Then, the portrait of my father in his uniform, the one that hung over the fireplace, was taken down. "It's too morbid, Helen," Frank had said. "We need to look forward, not backward." He replaced the hero who built this house with a $3,000 piece of abstract art that looked like spilled paint. But the moment I knew Frank was an enemy combatant happened a year later. I came home from my ROTC training for the weekend. I walked into the living room and froze. The American flag that had draped my father's casket, the one presented to my mother with the words, "On behalf of a grateful nation," was usually kept in a triangular display case on the mantel. That day, the case was open. The flag was unfolded, lying on the mudroom bench. Frank was sitting there, lacing up his golf shoes. It had been raining. His shoes were caked in mud. I watched, paralyzed, as he reached for the stars and stripes, my father's shroud, and used the corner of it to wipe a smudge of dirt off his leather heel. "What are you doing?" I had screamed, lunging forward to snatch the flag away. Frank just laughed, not even looking up. "Relax, soldier girl. It's just a piece of cloth. Your mom wanted me to clear off the mantel for her vase collection." He loved to play the patriot when it suited him. At the local country club bar, after 3 drinks, Frank would tell anyone who would listen about his time in the service and how much he loved this country. He stole the valor of better men to sell his contracts. But I had seen his medical records in the mail once. Classification, 4F. Reason, bone spurs. He hadn't served a day in his life. The erasure wasn't just emotional, it was physical. 3 days after the funeral, I went back to college. When I returned for Thanksgiving, my key didn't turn in the lock. I stood on the porch for 10 minutes, ringing the bell like a stranger. When Mom finally opened the door, she looked embarrassed. "Oh, Anna." Frank thought it was safer to change the locks. You know, with just us women in the house. "I live here, Mom," I said. "Well," she fidgeted with her pearls, a nervous tic she had developed since marrying him. "Frank needed a home office, and Brittany, well, she needed more closet space. So, we moved your things to the garage. My bedroom. The room where I grew up, where I dreamed of serving my country. Gone. Converted into a walk-in shoe closet for my 12-year-old half-sister. That night, I slept on the sofa. I realized then I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a guest, and an unwanted one at that. But the financial abuse was the sharpest blade. I remember my junior year of college. I was working 2 jobs, waitressing at a diner and stocking shelves at a library just to pay for my tuition. I came home one weekend to ask for help. "I need $500 for textbooks, Frank," I asked, swallowing my pride. "The Army stipend hasn't come through yet." Frank sat in Dad's chair, swirling his drink. "You need to learn responsibility, Anna. Money doesn't grow on trees. If you can't afford the books, maybe you're not smart enough for the class." I left the room, humiliated, tears stinging my eyes. But as I walked past the kitchen counter, I saw a checkbook lying open. Frank had just signed a check. Pay to the order of Elite Model Search Camp. Amount, $5,000. Gores. Memo. For Brittany's dreams. $5,000 for a scam modeling camp for a 12-year-old who spent her days taking selfies. $500 denied for the education of a future officer. The Bible says in Proverbs 22:28, "Remove not the ancient landmark, which thy fathers have set." Frank hadn't just moved the landmarks. He had bulldozed them. He had paved over my father's legacy with lies and debt. And that brought me back to the biggest question of all. The question that had been gnawing at me for a decade. Before he died, Dad had pulled me aside in the hospital. His voice was weak, rattled by the chemo, but his mind was sharp. "Anna," he had wheezed, "I've set up a trust, for you, and a separate account to keep the house running. You won't have to worry." But after the funeral, when I asked about it, Frank had shut me down with a look of pity that felt like a slap. Your father was a good man, Anna, but he was terrible with money. Frank had lied, shaking his head. He died drowning in debt. I had to sell everything just to keep the bank from taking the house. You should be thanking me for saving your mother from the street. I was 19 then. I was grieving. I didn't know how to read a ledger or audit a spreadsheet. I believed him. Or maybe I was just too broken to fight. But I'm not 19 anymore. I'm a quartermaster. My job is logistics. My job is to track every bullet, every MRE, every dollar that flows through the supply chain. I know when numbers don't add up. And looking at the way Frank spent money, the cars, the bags, the booze, while claiming poverty to the IRS, something was wrong. Dad was a colonel. He was disciplined. He didn't die broke. If you've ever felt like someone stole what was rightfully yours, or if you hate seeing good people get pushed aside by greedy fakes, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, do you believe in karma? Type yes if you think Frank is about to get what's coming to him. I dried my hands with the paper towel. The cranberry stain was still there, but I didn't care about the uniform anymore. I wasn't going back to the dining room to finish my meal. I remembered something. Dad's old laptop, the heavy military-grade brick he used for his personal files. Frank thought it was garbage. He had tossed it in a box in the attic years ago. But my grandmother, Dad's mom, had saved it. She had hidden it in the back of the linen closet under a stack of old quilts, just in case. I unlocked the bathroom door. The hallway was empty. Laughter drifted from the dining room. Brittany was probably showing off the bag's lining now. I turned left toward the stairs. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to the linen closet. It was time to audit the books. The house was finally quiet. The dinner guests had dispersed, leaving behind a battlefield of wine stains and half-eaten pumpkin pie. Frank was passed out in his recliner downstairs, the television blaring Fox News, while Brittany was likely in her room, editing her unboxing video to filter out the sound of my hip hitting the floor. I sat cross-legged on the floor of the guest room, the door locked and wedged shut with a heavy chair just in case. In front of me sat the trash. It was a Panasonic Toughbook, the kind issued to field officers 15 years ago. It was thick, heavy, and encased in magnesium alloy, a tank of a computer. Frank had tossed it into a donation pile years ago, claiming the hard drive was fried. But Grandma, bless her hoarding soul, hadn't trusted him. She'd slipped it to me earlier that evening, wrapped in an old Afghan, whispering that she'd kept it hidden in her linen closet between the quilts and the mothballs. I plugged it in. The battery was dead, but when I connected the power cord, the little green LED flickered to life. I held my breath. The cooling fan groaned like a dying jet engine, spinning up years of dust. The screen glowed a harsh, low-resolution blue. Then came the prompt. Enter password. I sat there, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Frank would have tried birthdays. He would have tried social security numbers. He would have tried 122345. That was why he thought it was broken. He couldn't get in. But I knew my father. I typed in the name of the stray dog we had rescued when I was 6. The dog Frank had hated because it shed on the carpets. Buckye. Access granted. The desktop loaded, cluttered with shortcuts to logistics software and old family photos. For a second, the investigative mode dropped. I stared at the wallpaper. It was a picture of me and Dad at a baseball game, eating hot dogs, laughing. I looked so young. He looked so alive. Tears pricked my eyes. A sob caught in my throat, hot and sharp. I wanted to close the lid, curl up, and just be the grieving daughter again. I wanted to mourn the man who had protected me. But then I remembered the cranberry sauce on my uniform. I remembered Frank's laugh. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. John 8:32. It was Dad's favorite verse. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Okay, Dad, I whispered. Let's see what you left me. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a quartermaster, and I was about to conduct an audit. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I had snapped of Frank's text message earlier. Ghost shipment cleared. Transfer the remaining $50K. I needed to find the pattern. Frank was lazy. Criminals are creatures of habit. If he was moving money now, he had started years ago. I opened the accounting software. It was an old version of QuickBooks, but I saw something else installed. A secondary encrypted database masquerading as a system file. In the military, we call this a double-entry bookkeeping scheme. One set of books for the IRS, showing low profits and high expenses. Another set for the real money. I cracked the secondary file. It wasn't hard. Frank had used the same password for everything after he took over Dad's PC. The spreadsheet that opened made my blood run cold. It was a map of theft. Systematic, ruthless looting. I scrolled through the years. Frank hadn't just mismanaged Dad's company. He had gutted it. He had created a web of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. And the name of the primary holding company? The Brittany Foundation. I felt sick. The charity Frank bragged about to his country club friends, the one he used to avoid taxes, was just a funnel for stolen cash. He was washing dirty money through a fake nonprofit named after the daughter he spoiled, while the daughter he abused scraped by on an army salary. But the numbers were impersonal. I needed something more to prove his character to the world. I opened his archived emails. Frank had been too arrogant to delete his sent folder before ditching the laptop. I searched for Helen, my mother. I found an exchange from 5 years ago. I remembered that winter. Mom's rheumatoid arthritis had flared up bad. She could barely walk. She needed Enbrel, an injectable biologic that cost thousands a month. Subject: medical bills, Humira. Copay. From Helen Day. To Frank Morrison. Frank, the insurance denied the new dosage. It's $4,000 out of pocket this month. I'm in so much pain. Can we transfer some from the business account? Please. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked on Frank's reply. From Frank Morrison. To Helen Day. Stop whining, Helen. We're liquidating assets to pay off your dead husband's debts. Remember? We're broke. Call Anna. She's an officer now. She's got that government money. Let her pay for it. It's her duty. I checked the date on the email, December 12th. Then I cross-referenced it with the secret ledger I'd just found. On December 12th of that same year, Frank had wired $45,000 to a broker in Miami. The memo line read, Deposit 3050 Sea Ray Sundancer. He bought a yacht. He bought a damn yacht the same week he told my mother to beg me for medicine money because they were broke. I had to put a hand over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. The rage wasn't hot anymore. It was absolute zero. It was a cold, hard resolve to burn his world to the ground. But I needed the kill shot. Tax fraud and emotional abuse were bad, but Frank played in the world of defense contracting. That meant federal jurisdiction. I went back to the ledger. I started looking at the inventory tab. I matched the code from the text message on my phone, ghost shipment, to the historical product codes in the laptop. Frank was a creature of habit. He was using the same suppliers he had established years ago. I found a contract from 2 years ago. Contract W92XXD004. Client, Department of Defense, DLA Aviation. Item, high tensile rotor bolts. NSN 530601442XXXX. Specs, grade 8, titanium alloy. Made in USA required. This was standard stuff. Bolts used in helicopter assemblies, critical safety components. Then I looked at the cost of goods sold column for that contract. Frank had purchased the bolts for 0 or 12 cents a unit. Titanium bolts don't cost 12 cents. I clicked on the supplier invoice. It wasn't a U.S. steel mill. It was a company called Shenzhen Metal Reclaim and Scrap. The description on the import manifest read, refurbished industrial scrap, non-aviation use. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my fingernails dug into the wood. Frank wasn't just stealing money. He was buying scrap metal from a Chinese junkyard, repainting it, stamping a fake Made in USA logo on it, and selling it to the U.S. military as aircraft-grade titanium. He was selling trash to keep American pilots in the air. And suddenly, the silence of the room was shattered by a memory. A memory of a phone call I received 2 years ago. A memory of a Black Hawk helicopter spinning out of control over the desert. A memory of my best friend, Mike. I looked at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes like a targeting laser. "You didn't just steal my inheritance, Frank," I whispered to the empty room. "You have blood on your hands." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a flash drive. My hand was steady now. I plugged it in and hit copy all. The progress bar moved slowly. 10%, 20%. I wasn't just auditing him anymore. I was preparing a court-martial. The download finished. I pulled the drive out and clenched it in my fist. It was small, cold, and heavy. It felt like a grenade. And I was about to pull the pin. The glow of the laptop screen seemed to turn the air in the room toxic. I wasn't looking at a spreadsheet anymore. I was looking at a crime scene. I clicked open a PDF file labeled Quality Assurance Report, Batch 409. It looked official. It had the Department of Defense Eagle seal at the top. It had the stamp of a certified metallurgist. It claimed that the rotor bolts Frank shipped to the Army Aviation Depot in Kandahar 2 years ago were grade 8 titanium, heat-treated in Pennsylvania, tested for stress fractures, and certified battle-ready. But I had the other window open, the real window. The invoice from Shenzhen Metal Reclaim showed the truth. Frank hadn't bought titanium. He had bought high-carbon steel scrap, stuff melted down from old washing machines and rebar, recast it, dipped it in a chrome finish to make it look shiny, and lasered a fake serial number onto the head. He paid 12 cents a bolt. He charged the American taxpayer $50 a bolt. It was a scam that made the Fat Leonard Navy bribery scandal look like petty theft. Leonard bribed admirals with hookers and cigars to overcharge for fuel. Frank was selling grenades disguised as safety parts. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I felt bile rising in my throat. Because I knew that part number. NSN 5306 01442 XSEC high tensile rotor assembly bolt. I froze. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. The silence of the house was replaced by a sound from 2 years ago, a sound I heard in my nightmares. The whump, whump, whump of a Black Hawk helicopter rotor blade struggling to bite into the thin desert air. My vision blurred. I wasn't in Northern Virginia anymore. I was back at Bagram Airfield. It was 1400 hours, hot, dry, the kind of heat that tastes like dust. My best friend, Mike, Chief Warrant Officer Mike Ramirez, was running a routine supply hop to a forward operating base. I was on the tarmac, signing off on a manifest for MREs. "Catch you on the flip side, Anna," Mike had yelled over the engine noise, flashing a thumbs up from the cockpit. He was smiling. He was talking about his fiancée back in Texas. They were going to get married in the spring. The bird lifted off. It got about 300 feet in the air. And then, the sound changed. It wasn't the rhythmic beat of the blades anymore. It was a high-pitched metallic scream, like a banshee, like metal shearing against metal. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the sun. I saw the main rotor wobble. It wasn't supposed to do that. The nut holding the assembly together, the bolt that Frank had supplied, snapped. The physics of flight ended. The violence of gravity took over. The helicopter didn't glide. It dropped like a stone. It spun, wild, uncontrollable circles. I heard the pilot screaming over the radio, but I didn't need a headset to hear the impact. Crunch. The sound of 3 tons of machinery hitting the hard-packed earth is something you feel in your teeth. Dust exploded. Then came the fire. I ran. I ran toward the wreckage before the sirens even started. I pulled Mike out of the cockpit. But I didn't pull all of him out. The instrument panel had crushed his legs. The jagged metal of the fuselage had severed his right leg below the knee. There was so much blood. It soaked my uniform, turning the desert camouflage into a dark, sticky red. Just like the cranberry sauce on my dress greens tonight. "Anna!" Mike had gasped, his face gray with shock. "My leg. I can't feel my leg." The investigation report had been inconclusive. Catastrophic mechanical failure, they called it. Metal fatigue. I sat back in the guest room chair, trembling. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and fast. It wasn't metal fatigue. It wasn't bad luck. It was Frank. Frank wanted a vacation home in the Hamptons. Frank wanted to join the platinum tier at the country club. And to get it, he bought 12-cent bolts from a scrapyard and put them in Mike's helicopter. Mike lost his leg because Frank wanted a bigger boat. Ding. The sound of my own phone startled me. It was a cheerful, bright notification sound. I looked down. An Instagram notification. Brittany XO just posted to her story. My thumb moved automatically. I tapped the screen. The video was loud. Pop music blared. Brittany was filming herself in the mirror of her bedroom down the hall. She was wearing a new designer jacket, holding up shopping bags. "Ugh, you guys," she said to the camera, doing a sad, pouty face. "Dad is totally stressing about work again, so he gave me his Amex to cheer me up. Retail therapy is real. Just dropped $20K at Tyson's Corner. The vibe is immaculate." She zoomed in on the receipt. Total, $20,350. When you overseas. I did the math in my head. $20,000. That was the exact profit margin on one crate of those counterfeit bolts. Frank had taken the blood money from the accident that crippled my best friend and given it to his daughter to buy jackets she would wear once. I threw the phone onto the bed. I couldn't touch it. It felt contaminated. I reached into my duffel bag, the one I hadn't even unpacked yet. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of a small box. I pulled it out. Inside was Mike's Purple Heart. He had given it to me to hold onto while he went into his 5th surgery for prosthetics fitting. "Keep it safe, Anna," he'd said. "You were the one who pulled me out." I clutched the metal in my hand. The edges dug into my palm. I squeezed it until I felt my skin break, until the physical pain grounded me. General Douglas MacArthur's farewell speech echoed in my mind. Duty, honor, country. Those 3 hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. Frank Morrison had betrayed all 3. He had betrayed his duty as a citizen. He had sold his honor for cash. He had sold out his country to the lowest bidder. The tears on my face stopped. The grief that had been choking me for 2 years evaporated. In its place was something else, something cold, something dangerous. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. I wasn't a stepdaughter angry about a lost inheritance. I wasn't a sister jealous of a handbag. I was an officer of the United States Army. And I had just identified a domestic terrorist living in my mother's house. I looked at the laptop screen one last time. I looked at the fake, Made in USA stamp on the digital invoice. "You want a war, Frank?" I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded different. It was guttural. "You just deployed to the wrong combat zone." I stood up. I didn't limp this time. I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark driveway where Frank's Mercedes was parked. I wasn't going to just report him. That was too easy. Reporting him meant lawyers, plea deals, maybe a few years in a minimum security prison where he could work on his golf swing. No, I wanted him destroyed. I wanted him to feel the same panic Mike felt as the ground rushed up to meet him. I turned back to the computer. I had the evidence. Now I needed the ammunition, and I knew exactly where to aim the first shot. Sun Tzu wrote, "Attack him where he is unprepared, appear where you are not expected." Frank expected a screaming match. He expected me to cry to my mother or maybe file a civil lawsuit for my inheritance, something his high-priced lawyers could tie up in court for years until I ran out of money. He didn't expect a tactical nuclear strike on his finances from a Waffle House booth at 3 a.m. I had relocated to a cheap motel off I-95. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner, but the Wi-Fi was strong. I sat there with Dad's old tough book, a cup of lukewarm diner coffee, and a cold, predatory focus. I wasn't Anna the daughter anymore. I was Captain Day, coordinating fire support. Target 1, the IRS. I navigated to the official IRS whistleblower office portal. In the US, tax fraud is a serious game, but reporting it is even more serious. I filled out Form 211. It's a beautiful document. It allows an individual to report major tax evasion, and if the government recovers the money, the whistleblower gets up to 30% of the take. I uploaded the double entry ledgers I had pulled from Frank's secret drive. I highlighted the Brittany Foundation shell companies in the Caymans. I attached the receipts for the yacht, the cars, and the country club fees he wrote off as business expenses. Click, sent. Frank Morrison wasn't just going to get audited, he was going to get gutted. Target 2. The Department of Defense. This was the kill shot. I logged into the Department of Defense hotline, the secure channel for reporting fraud, waste, and abuse. I uploaded the invoices from the Chinese scrapyard. I uploaded the falsified Made in USA certificates. I linked them directly to the NSN codes for the rotor bolts that killed Mike. This wasn't just fraud. This was a violation of the outcome of the Buy American Act, and, more importantly, it was negligent homicide. The DCIS, Defense Criminal Investigative Service, doesn't play games. They don't send letters. They send agents with badges and guns. Click, sent. By 4:30 a.m., the heavy lifting was done. But I wasn't finished. I wanted to see them bleed. I wanted immediate visual confirmation of impact. I remembered the repo notice I had found buried in Frank's spam folder. Apparently, the lease on Brittany's matte black G-Wagon was 3 months behind. Frank was juggling creditors, robbing Peter to pay Paul, assuming his next government contract would cover the spread. I found the number for the local asset recovery firm, the Repo Men. They operate 24/7. I sent an anonymous tip through their website, dropping the pin for the exact GPS coordinates of Frank's driveway. Then, I hacked into the house. It wasn't hard. Frank used the same password for his Ring security cameras as he did for his email, Moneymaker1. I logged in, disabled the notification that would alert his phone, and pulled up the live feed of the driveway. Then, I waited. The sun came up over the manicured lawns of Northern Virginia at 6:45 a.m. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of wealthy silence where you can hear a Tesla backing out of a garage 3 houses down. At 7:02 a.m., a heavy-duty tow truck turned the corner. It wasn't subtle. It was a massive diesel-chugging beast with Raptor Recovery painted on the side. I took a sip of my coffee, watching the screen like it was a movie. The driver was a pro. He backed up to the G-Wagon in seconds. The backup alarm, beep, 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 cut through the morning air like a siren. That woke them up. I saw the front door fly open. Brittany ran out. She was wearing silk pajamas and fuzzy slippers, her phone already in her hand, recording. Hey, hey. I could hear her screaming through the camera's microphone. What are you doing? Get away from my car. Daddy, Daddy. The tow truck driver didn't even look at her. He hooked the chains under the axle. The G-Wagon, the symbol of Brittany's influencer status, tilted into the air. Then Frank appeared. He waddled out in his bathrobe, looking disheveled and hungover. He started yelling at the driver, waving his arms. Do you know who I am? Frank roared. I'll sue you. Put it down. The driver just handed Frank a clipboard through the window. Bank's orders, pal. Payments are 90 days past due. Call your lender. With a hydraulic whine, the truck hoisted the SUV onto the flatbed. Frank stood there, powerless. Brittany collapsed on the lawn, sobbing theatrically. My vibe, she shrieked. How am I supposed to go to brunch? I watched from my motel room, a cold smile touching my lips. It was petty, yes. But after watching them steal my father's legacy, seeing them lose a toy felt like a small down payment on justice. But the celebration was cut short by my own phone ringing. It was Mom. For a split second, a foolish part of me thought she was calling to check on me. Maybe she had realized she was wrong. Maybe she was calling to apologize for last night. I answered. Hello? Anna. Her voice was shrill, panicked, but not for me. What did you do? I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. Don't lie to me, she snapped. We're at the country club for breakfast. Frank just tried to pay for our omelets, and his card was declined. The platinum card, Anna. The waiter. The waiter looked at us like we were criminals. It was humiliating. I closed my eyes. Frank's card got declined, and that's my fault? You said you were going to ruin us, she hissed. Frank is furious. He's on the phone with the bank now, screaming. He says you must have reported the card stolen or hacked his accounts. How could you be so vindictive? He's your father. He's not my father, I said, my voice dead calm. And if his card is declined, Mom, it's because he's broke. He's been lying to you. Stop it, she screamed. Just stop it. Fix this, Anna. Send money. Transfer your savings. I don't care what you have to do. Fix this before the neighbors start talking. Click. She hung up. She didn't ask if my hip hurt. She didn't ask where I had slept. She only cared that her omelet wasn't paid for and that her social standing was threatened. I put the phone down on the motel nightstand. The silence in the room was heavy. I looked back at the laptop screen. The tow truck was gone. The driveway was empty. Frank was standing on the porch, furiously typing on his phone. The bank had frozen his assets. The IRS algorithms had flagged his accounts based on my report. The asset freeze I requested via the whistleblower protocol had kicked in faster than I expected. Frank wasn't just embarrassed at the club. He was locked out. He couldn't move money. He couldn't pay off the Chinese suppliers. He couldn't bribe anyone. He was a rat in a trap, and the water was rising. But I knew men like Frank. When they get cornered, they don't surrender. They get dangerous. I watched him on the screen. He stopped typing. He looked up directly at the security camera, as if he knew I was watching. The look on his face wasn't fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated malice. He turned and walked back into the house, slamming the door. My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming next. He couldn't fight me on the facts. The facts were all on my side, so he wasn't going to fight the facts. He was going to attack the source. He was going to attack my credibility. I reached for my handgun on the table, checking the safety out of habit. The financial war was won. But the psychological war was just beginning. The knock on my motel room door came at 800 hours. It wasn't the housekeeping cart. It was a rhythmic, authoritative pounding that every soldier recognizes instantly. I opened the door. 2 military police officers stood there, flanked by a Fairfax County detective. They didn't smile. They didn't salute. Captain Anna Day, the lead MP asked. We have a summons regarding a red flag protective order filed against you. You need to come with us. They drove me to the provost marshal's office, not a jail cell, but it felt the same. The interrogation room was cold, smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant. I sat there for an hour, my hands folded on the metal table, my mind racing. I expected to answer questions about Frank's fraud. I expected to be treated as a witness. Instead, the door opened and Richard Vance walked in. Richard was Frank's lawyer, a man who wore 3-piece suits that cost more than my car and smiled like a shark sensing blood in the water. He didn't sit down. He just tossed a thick file onto the table. Rough night, Captain? Richard asked, his voice smooth and condescending. You look tired. Maybe a little unstable? Cut the crap, Richard, I said, my voice steady. I know Frank is panicked. I know his assets are frozen. You're here to cut a deal. Richard laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. A deal? Oh, Anna, we aren't here to negotiate. We're here to help you. He leaned in, placing his palms on the table. We know about your PTSD, Anna. We know about the trauma you suffered when your friend Mike died. It's tragic, really. It makes people do crazy things. Imagine conspiracies. Threaten their families. My blood ran cold. I am perfectly sane. And I have evidence. Do you? Richard opened the file. Because according to the affidavit filed this morning under Virginia's red flag laws, you are an imminent danger to yourself and others. You hacked your father's security system, a federal crime. You stalked your sister, and you made verbal threats to destroy your family. He slid a piece of paper toward me. Read it. I looked down. It was a sworn statement. I, Helen Morrison, hereby state that my daughter, Anna Day, has been exhibiting signs of severe paranoia and violent aggression since returning from deployment. She destroyed property at dinner. She threatened her stepfather. I fear for our safety. At the bottom was a signature. Helen Morrison. I traced the ink with my thumb. It wasn't forged. It was shaky, maybe written under duress, maybe written while Frank stood over her screaming, but it was her hand. My mother had signed a document declaring me mentally unfit. She had weaponized my service, my grief, and my uniform to protect her husband's credit card. The room seemed to tilt. The air grew thin. This is the soldier's worst nightmare. We survive the war, we survive the loss, only to come home and have the very people we protected call us crazy because it's convenient for them. Here is the situation, Richard said, checking his Rolex. The Army takes these allegations very seriously. Article 133, conduct unbecoming. Plus the criminal charges for the hacking. You're looking at a dishonorable discharge. You'll lose your pension. You'll lose your benefits. You'll be committed for a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air like toxic gas. Or, he continued, you withdraw your report to the IRS. You tell the DCIS it was a misunderstanding, a glitch in the old laptop caused by a virus. You check yourself into a private wellness center for exhaustion. Frank pays for it. You keep your rank. You just go away for a while. He smiled again. Frank loves you, Anna. He just wants you to get help. I looked at him. I looked at the signature of the woman who gave birth to me. I felt a cracking sensation in my chest, louder than the sound of my hip hitting the floor. I need a moment, I whispered. Take your time, Richard said, stepping back. But the MPs are outside waiting to collect your service weapon. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. He walked out. Administrative leave, stripped of duty, stripped of purpose. An hour later, I was back in my apartment, not the motel. I'd been forced to return to my legal residence to surrender my firearm. The MPs had taken the firing pin, rendering my Sig Sauer P320 a useless paperweight. I sat on the edge of my bed. The blinds were drawn. The apartment was silent. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. My mother had betrayed me. My sister was a stranger. My enemy held all the cards. The system I believed in, the law, the military, was being turned against me by a man with a checkbook. I looked at the gun on the nightstand. It was just metal and polymer now. Like me, hollowed out. I felt the darkness creeping in. The voice in my head, the one that sounded like Frank, whispered that I should just give up. Sign the papers. Take the deal. Go to the wellness center and let them drug me into oblivion. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe fighting a millionaire was a suicide mission. I put my head in my hands. The tears finally came, hot and stinging. Not tears of sadness, but tears of frustration. I was at the bottom of a deep, dark well, and the walls were slick with oil. But then, a different voice cut through the noise. It wasn't Richard's voice. It wasn't my mother's. It was David Goggins. I remembered listening to his audiobook during rucksacks in the desert. When you think you're done, you're only at 40% of what your body's capable of doing. That's just the limits that we put on ourselves. I lifted my head. I wiped my face. They wanted me to be the broken veteran. They wanted me to be the crazy daughter. Because if I was crazy, then Frank wasn't a criminal. I stood up and walked to the mirror. My eyes were red, but the fire behind them hadn't gone out. It was just banking down, waiting for oxygen. I am not done, I said to the empty room. I am at 40%. This is the hardest part of the story for me to tell. Being gaslit by your own family is a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. If you have ever been made to feel crazy just for speaking the truth, or if you stand with veterans who are wrongly stigmatized, please hit that like button right now. And comment "I believe you" below. I need to know I'm not fighting this battle alone tonight. I washed my face with cold water. I put my uniform jacket back on, even though I was technically suspended. It was my armor. Richard said I had no way out. He said no one would believe me. But he made one mistake. He assumed I was fighting this war alone. He assumed the only family I had was the one that lived in that mansion. He forgot about the other family, the one forged in blood and gold stars. And just as that thought crossed my mind, just as I was tightening my bootlaces for the next round, knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the MPs this time. The knock was softer, gentle, but persistent. I walked to the door, my heart hammering. Was it Richard coming back for my signature? Was it the men with the white coats? I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. It wasn't the police. Standing in the hallway was an old woman leaning on a cane, flanked by 3 women I'd never met before. But I recognized them instantly, not by their faces, but by the lapel pins they wore on their coats, a gold star on a purple background. "We heard you were in trouble, Captain," my grandmother said, her eyes twinkling with a defiance that skipped a generation. "So I brought in the heavy cavalry." The knocking didn't stop. It wasn't aggressive, but it was relentless. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my uniform jacket. I expected to see the grim faces of the military police, or worse, the white coats of a psychiatric transport team sent by Richard. I braced myself, mentally rehearsing my rights under the UCMJ. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, ready for a fight. But I didn't find a fight. I found a casserole. Standing in the hallway, leaning heavily on a cane but looking sharper than a tack, was my grandmother, Evelyn Day. And she wasn't alone. Flanking her were 3 women I'd never met. They were older, dressed in sensible winter coats against the Virginia chill. They didn't look like soldiers. They looked like the women you'd see at a church bake sale or a library board meeting. But then I saw the lapel pins on their coats, a purple circle, a gold star in the center. My breath caught in my throat. In America, you don't mess with the Marines, and you certainly don't mess with the Gold Star mothers. These were women who had lost a son or daughter in active duty service to the United States. They carried a moral authority that no lawyer, no millionaire, and no politician could touch. "Grandma," I stammered, my hand falling from the doorknob. "You look like hell, Anna," Grandma said, stepping inside and brushing past me. "And you're too skinny. I told you those MREs would ruin your stomach." "We brought dinner," the woman to her left said. She was a petite African-American woman with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen everything. She was holding a heavy Pyrex dish wrapped in a towel. The smell hit me instantly. Roasted garlic, tomato sauce, and melted mozzarella. It was the smell of home. Not the cold, sterile house I'd grown up in, but the idea of home. "I'm Mrs. Higgins," she said, walking straight to my tiny kitchenette. "Put this on the table, sugar. It's lasagna." My son, Marcus, he loved lasagna. He was a quartermaster too, just like you. 101st Airborne. I stood there, stunned, as these 4 women invaded my small, sad apartment and filled it with warmth and noise. "We heard about the red flag order," the 3rd woman said, taking off her coat. She was tall, wearing a pearl brooch next to her gold star. "My name is Martha. My husband is a retired judge in Fairfax County. We know Richard Vance. He's a snake in a 3-piece suit. He tried to pull a competency hearing on a veteran in '08 to steal his pension. We stopped him then, and we'll stop him now." I looked at Grandma. How did you organize this?" Grandma sat down on my sofa, resting her cane. "Anna, you have your intelligence network. I have mine. We call it the Bingo Hall Telegraph. But make no mistake, we are effective." I sat down at the small dining table. Mrs. Higgins cut a massive square of lasagna and placed it in front of me. "Eat," she commanded gently. "You can't fight a war on an empty stomach." I took a bite. The cheese was hot and stringy. It tasted real. It tasted like care. For the first time since I stepped off the plane from the Middle East, my shoulders dropped. The knot of anxiety in my chest loosened just enough to let me breathe. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, looking around at them. "You don't even know me." Mrs. Higgins stopped fussing with the napkins. She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm. "We know you, Anna," she said softly. "When a soldier hurts, we hurt. Your mother, she chose her side. She chose the money. She chose the comfort. Mrs. Higgins's eyes hardened. But we are mothers who didn't get a choice. We lost our children. So when we see a child of the service being attacked, being called crazy, just for having the courage to speak the truth, we take that personally. Besides, Martha added, pulling a manila folder from her oversized purse, we have a score to settle with Frank Morrison. I stopped chewing. You know Frank? Know him, Martha scoffed. 15 years ago, before he met your mother, Frank was the treasurer for the Heroes of Nova War Memorial Fund. We were raising money to build a statue in the town square. She opened the folder and slid a photocopy of an old newspaper clipping across the table. Local charity audit reveals missing funds. Treasurer resigns. He skimmed off the top, Martha said, her voice dripping with disgust. $40,000 meant for a monument to dead soldiers. He called it administrative fees. It was legal enough to keep him out of jail, but dirty enough to get him run out of the Rotary Club. He used that money to buy his first Porsche. He stole from the dead, I whispered. He's a scavenger, Anna, Grandma said. He finds vulnerable people, widows, grieving daughters, charities, and he bleeds them dry. He thought because your father died, no one was watching the gate. He was wrong. Mrs. Higgins sat across from me. We've been watching him for years, waiting for him to slip up. But we're outsiders. We never had access to the books. We never had an insider. Until now, I said, realizing the implications. I have the data. I have the proof of the fake bolts. And we have the character witnesses, Martha said. If Richard tries to paint you as insane in court, 50 Gold Star mothers will march into that courtroom and stand behind you. Let's see a judge grant a red flag order then. Tears pricked my eyes again, but these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. I wasn't an orphan anymore. I had found my tribe. But we need one more thing, Grandma said, leaning forward. Richard is good. He's slippery. He'll try to get your evidence thrown out as fruit of the poisonous tree, claiming you hacked the computer illegally. We need someone who can testify to his conspiracy. Who? I asked. Martha pulled a sticky note from the file. On it was a name and a phone number written in shaky handwriting. Dorothy Miller, Martha read. She was Richard's paralegal for 10 years. She knows where every skeleton is buried. Frank had her fired 2 weeks ago because she refused to shred a box of documents related to the Brittany Foundation. She's angry, Mrs. Higgins added, pouring me a glass of iced tea. And she's broke. She's working at a bakery in Alexandria now. If you go to her, officer to civilian, and show her you're ready to fight, she might just give you the smoking gun. I looked at the note. Dorothy Miller. This was it. This was the bridge between my digital evidence and a criminal conviction. I looked up at the women. My grandmother, the matriarch. Mrs. Higgins, the nurturer. Martha, the enforcer. They had come into my darkest hour with lasagna and logic. Eat up, Captain, Grandma said, tapping her cane on the floor. You have a meeting in the morning. I took another bite of the lasagna. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. My mother had signed a paper saying I was dangerous. She was right. I was dangerous. Because now I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the sons of these women. I was fighting for the memory of the men Frank stole from. And I had an army of mothers covering my 6. The address on the sticky note led me to Miller's Need, a small, unassuming bakery in Old Town Alexandria. It was the kind of place where politicians' aides grabbed coffee off the record. It smelled of yeast and rain. I spotted Dorothy immediately. She was sitting in a booth in the back, looking nervous, twisting a paper napkin into shreds. But she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a woman I recognized instantly, a woman I despised. Sarah. Frank's executive assistant. The 20-something blonde with the fake tan and the skirts that were against dress code in any reputable office. The woman I had seen giggling at Frank's jokes while my mother sat at home in pain. My blood boiled. Was this a trap? Had Dorothy sold me out to Frank's mistress? I marched over to the booth, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. What the hell is she doing here, Dorothy? I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. I looked at Sarah with pure venom. Go run back to Frank. Tell him his little spy game didn't work. Sarah looked up. She didn't giggle. She didn't pop her gum. Her eyes were cold, sharp, and completely sober. Sit down, Captain Day, she said. Her voice was different, lower, authoritative, stripped of the breathless airhead accent she used at the office. I'm not sitting with you, I spat. Sarah didn't blink. She reached into her designer purse. I tensed, ready to grab her wrist, thinking she was going for a phone to record me. Instead, she pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open on the table. A gold shield gleamed under the pendant light. Federal Bureau of Investigation. I froze. I'm Special Agent Sarah Jenkins, Financial Crimes Division, she said, sliding the badge across the table. And I'm not sleeping with your stepfather, Anna. I've been building a RICO case against him for 24 months. I sat down. My legs felt weak. You're a Fed? Undercover, Sarah corrected, snapping the wallet shut. Frank is a predator, Anna. He targets women he thinks are stupid. So, I played the part. I let him harass me, I let him make his disgusting comments, and I recorded every single transaction he made. She took a sip of black coffee. But I'm not the one who started this investigation. I was just the asset deployed to finish it. What do you mean? Sarah looked at me, her expression softening for the first time. This operation, we call it Operation Omega. It wasn't started by the FBI. It was started by an informant within the company, 10 years ago. She reached into her bag again and pulled out an iPad. He knew he was dying, Anna. He knew Frank was circling like a vulture. He knew your mother was too weak to stop him. So he came to us. She pressed play and turned the screen toward me. The screen flickered. And there he was. My father, Colonel Day. He looked thinner than I remembered, the cancer already eating away at him, but he was wearing his uniform. He was sitting in his study, the room Frank had turned into a shoe closet. Hello, Anna Banana, Dad's voice cracked through the bakery's speaker. A sob escaped my throat before I could stop it. It had been 10 years since I heard that nickname. If you are watching this, Dad continued, looking directly into the camera lens, then I'm gone. And if Agent Jenkins is showing you this, it means Frank has finally crossed the line from greed to treason. Dad took a deep breath on the screen. I didn't lose our money, sweetie. I hid it. I moved the family trust into a blind account that Frank can't touch. It's a dead man's switch. It only unlocks when Frank is indicted for a federal crime. I knew he would try to steal everything. I knew he would try to erase me. But I couldn't stop him while I was sick. So I turned my company into a honeypot. I let him think he was winning so he would lead the authorities to the bigger fish, the suppliers. Dad leaned in closer to the camera. His eyes were wet. I'm sorry I have to leave you on this battlefield alone, soldier. I'm sorry I can't be there to walk you down the aisle or protect you from him. But I know you. You're strong. Stronger than I ever was. Finish the mission, Anna. Take him down. I love you. The screen went black. I sat there in the bakery, tears streaming down my face, dripping onto my uniform. I wasn't crying from grief anymore. I was crying from relief. He hadn't left me. He hadn't been careless. He had been playing the long game. He had been protecting me from the grave this whole time. He was a good man, Anna, Sarah said softly. He gave us everything we needed to track the Chinese supply ring. But we needed Frank to make the final mistake. We needed him to panic. My report, I whispered. The whistle blowing. Exactly, Sarah nodded. When you froze his assets, you triggered the panic. He started making sloppy calls. And that's where Dorothy comes in. I looked at Dorothy. The quiet paralegal wiped her eyes with a tissue. I was in the office yesterday, Dorothy said, her voice trembling. When Richard came back from the police station, he and Frank thought they were alone. They were laughing about the red flag order, about how easy it was to trick your mother. Dorothy pulled a small digital voice recorder from her pocket. I've been the invisible woman in that office for 10 years. They forgot I was there. She pressed play. Frank's voice. Is it done? Is the bitch locked up? Richard's voice. The order is filed. Once she's in the psych ward, we'll drug her until she can't remember her own name. Her testimony will be useless. The IRS will drop the case if the whistleblower is certified insane. Frank's voice. Good. I want her broken, Richard. I want her erased, just like her father. The recording ended. The silence in the booth was heavy, charged with electricity. That, Sarah said, tapping the recorder, is obstruction of justice, conspiracy to kidnap, and witness tampering. Combined with the fraud charges, Frank isn't looking at fines anymore. He's looking at life in Leavenworth. She looked at me. The dead man's switch is active, Anna. The trust fund is unlocking as we speak. But we have one problem. Frank is planning to flee. We intercepted a flight plan for a private jet to the Caymans departing tomorrow morning. I wiped my face. I sat up straight. The despair of the last 24 hours was gone. In its place was the cold, hard steel of command. He's not going anywhere, I said. Sarah smiled. It was a dangerous smile. We have a SWAT team on standby. We were waiting for a green light from the key witness. That's you. I looked at the badge. I looked at the recorder. I thought about my father's voice. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." My father had bent the arc for 10 years. Now it was time for it to snap back. Agent Jenkins, I said, my voice steady. What time is sunrise? Is 600 hours, Sarah replied. Then tell your men to gear up, I said. We have a house to clean. 500 hours. In the military, we call this stand 2. It's the time just before sunrise when you man the perimeter, because that's when the enemy is most likely to attack. But today, we were the attack. I sat in the passenger seat of an FBI Lenco Bearcat, a massive armored tactical vehicle that looked like a black tank on wheels. We were parked at the end of my mother's street in the wealthy subdivision of Great Falls. The neighborhood was dead silent. The only light came from the street lamps reflecting off the manicured lawns and the frost on the windshields of parked Range Rovers. Target location confirmed, Agent Sarah Jenkins said into her radio. She was no longer the gum-chewing secretary in a short skirt. She was wearing a Kevlar vest with FBI emblazoned in yellow across the chest, holding an M4 carbine. Perimeter is set. All units, hold for green light. I adjusted the collar of my Class A uniform. I had spent an hour ironing it this morning. Every crease was razor sharp. My shoes shone like black glass. I wasn't here as a daughter. I was here as a witness for the prosecution. You ready, Captain? Sarah asked, looking over at me. Execute, I said. Sarah keyed her mic. All units, go, go, go. The silence of the morning was shattered. 6 unmarked SUVs and 2 local police cruisers roared down the street, their engines screaming. The blue and red strobe lights erupted, painting the white colonial mansions in a chaotic disco of law enforcement colors. The Bearcat smashed over the curb of Frank's driveway, crushing a decorative azalea bush. Federal agents, search warrant! The voice on the loudspeaker boomed, shaking the windows of the entire block. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on instantly. Curtains twitched. The show had begun. A team of 6 SWAT operators in full tactical gear stacked up at the front door. The point man carried a battering ram. Boom. One hit. The heavy oak door, the one Frank had locked me out of so many times, splintered inward. FBI, open up, hands where we can see them. I watched from the command vehicle monitors. It was chaos inside. Clear left, clear right, second floor. Minutes later, the front door opened again. But this time, the king of the castle wasn't walking out. He was being dragged. Frank Morrison, the man who wore $3,000 suits and lectured me about net worth, was stumbled out onto the porch. He was wearing silk pajamas that clung to his paunch. His hair was a mess. He was barefoot, hopping on the cold concrete, and his hands were zip-tied behind his back. This is a mistake, Frank was screaming, his face purple. Do you know who I am? I know senators. I play golf with the DA. Call Richard Vance. Behind him, another agent escorted Brittany out. She wasn't in handcuffs yet, but she looked terrified. She was clutching her iPhone like a lifeline, trying to live stream. Put the phone down, the agent barked, snatching it from her hand. Hey, that's my property, Brittany shrieked. You can't take that. My followers are watching. It's evidence, ma'am, the agent said, bagging it. You're being detained for possession of stolen property and conspiracy to launder money. Brittany's jaw dropped. The reality of a federal indictment hit her harder than a bad comment section. Then, my mother appeared. Helen stood in the doorway, clutching her robe tight around her throat. She wasn't arrested. She stood there, trembling, watching the flashing lights illuminate the wreckage of her social status. She looked old, smaller than I had ever seen her. Frank? She wailed. Frank, what's happening? They said Rico? Frank stopped struggling. He looked at his wife. He looked at the woman who had signed a paper calling her own daughter insane just to protect him. Do something, Helen, Frank roared, spit flying from his mouth. Call the bank. Call the lawyer. Don't just stand there crying, you useless woman. Useless. The word hung in the cold morning air. I saw my mother flinch physically, as if he had slapped her. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the years of, I'm doing this for us. It all evaporated. In his moment of crisis, he didn't check if she was okay. He didn't tell her he loved her. He called her useless. She had sold her daughter for a man who viewed her as nothing more than an accessory. Bring the prisoner to the vehicle, Sarah ordered. They marched Frank down the driveway toward the Bearcat. He was still ranting, his eyes scanning the crowd of neighbors who had gathered in their bathrobes to watch the downfall of the neighborhood bully. Then, he saw me. I stepped out of the armored vehicle. The floodlights caught the gold bars on my shoulders and the bronze star on my chest. I stood tall, my posture perfect, my face impassive. Frank froze. He blinked, trying to process the image. The insane, broken stepdaughter was standing there like the statue of Lady Justice herself. You! Frank hissed. He lunged forward, but the agents held him back. You ungrateful little brat! I fed you. I put a roof over your head. You did this? You betrayed your family. Sarah stepped in front of him, pulling a piece of paper from her vest. Frank Morrison, she read, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. You are under arrest for violation of the RICO Act, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and negligent homicide regarding the death of Warrant Officer Michael Ramirez. Under federal forfeiture laws, this house, your accounts, and all assets are hereby seized. Frank's knees buckled. Negligent homicide? He whispered. That was just business. It was murder, I said. Frank looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with fear for the first time. Anna, please, tell them. I'm family. We can work this out. The trust fund? I can give it back. Just tell them to stop. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had wiped his muddy shoes on my father's flag. I didn't say a word. I slowly raised my right hand. Fingers straight, palm flat, arm parallel to the ground. I rendered a slow, sharp hand salute. It wasn't a salute of respect for him. It was a salute to the mission accomplished. It was a signal to my father that the perimeter was secure. It was a goodbye to the toxicity that had poisoned my life for a decade. Frank slumped, defeated. The agents shoved him into the back of the SUV. The heavy door slammed shut with a finality that echoed down the street. I lowered my hand. I looked back at the house. My mother was still standing on the porch, weeping into her hands. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, begging for me to come up the steps and fix it, just like I used to fix the leaky faucets and pay the bills. Anna, she mouthed. I looked at her. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like a memory of a pain I used to have. I didn't move toward the porch. I didn't offer comfort. She had made her choice when she signed that paper. She was a casualty of her own cowardice. We're done here, I said to Sarah. I turned my back on the mansion, on the crying woman, and on the flashing lights. The sun was just starting to crest over the tree line. A new day was breaking over Northern Virginia. It was cold, but for the first time in 10 years, the air tasted clean. The sound of a federal gavel striking mahogany is different from any other sound in the world. It's final. It's heavy. It sounds like a door slamming shut forever. Frank Morrison, the judge said, looking over his spectacles. For the crimes of wire fraud, violations of the RICO Act, and negligent homicide, I sentence you to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole. 3 months had passed since the raid. The courtroom in Alexandria was packed. Frank stood at the defense table, but he wasn't the boisterous, red-faced tycoon anymore. He looked deflated, gray, and small in his orange jumpsuit. He didn't look back at the gallery. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the handcuffs on his wrists, finally understanding that no amount of smooth talking could bribe his way out of a federal cage. I sat in the front row, wearing civilian clothes, a simple navy blazer and jeans. My uniform was back in the closet, clean and honored. Today, I was just Anna. I looked over at the co-defendant's table. Brittany wasn't going to prison. She was a first-time offender, and her lawyer argued she was just a pawn. But the judge had been creative. Ms. Morrison, the judge had said, you seem to care a great deal about appearances, so, for your probation, you will serve 2,000 hours of community service. I looked out the window of the courthouse later that afternoon. Down on the street, a highway cleanup crew was working. There was Brittany. She wasn't wearing Hermes. She was wearing a neon orange vest over shapeless gray sweats, holding a trash picker, spearing cigarette butts and fast food wrappers off the sidewalk. No phone, no filters, just the reality she had tried so hard to ignore. As I walked down the courthouse steps, breathing in the crisp spring air, I heard a voice I'd been dreading. Anna! I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I took a breath, centering myself. Then, I turned. My mother, Helen, was standing near the bottom of the steps. She looked frail. The pearls were gone, seized as assets. She was wearing a coat I recognized from 5 years ago, before Frank. She looked like the woman who used to bake cookies with me before she let the greed rot her soul. She hurried toward me, her eyes wet. Anna, thank God. I've been trying to call you. I changed my number, Mom, I said gently. I know, she stammered, wringing her hands. Listen, honey. The lawyers? They took the house. They took the cars. I'm staying at a Motel 6 on Route 1. It's awful. The mattress smells. She reached out, trying to take my hand. I stepped back, just an inch. But it was a canyon. I need help, Anna, she pleaded. Just a loan, until I get on my feet. Frank says if we can just hire a better appeals lawyer, maybe. She was still doing it. Even now, with Frank in a cell, she was still trying to fix his mess. She was still looking for a man to save her, or a daughter to pay for her mistakes. I can't give you money, Mom, I said. Her face crumbled. But the trust fund, your father left millions. You're rich now. You're going to let your own mother live in a motel? I'm not letting you do anything, I said. You're an adult, Mom. You made choices. You signed that paper calling me insane. You watched Frank hit me and told me to apologize. I was scared, she cried. He made me. Maya Angelou once said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I quoted softly. You showed me who you are, Mom. You chose your comfort over my safety, and I forgive you for that. I truly do. Then help me. I reached into my bag. I pulled out a plain white envelope. It wasn't thick. It didn't hold a check. This is the only help I can give you, I said, handing it to her. She tore it open, her hands shaking. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her face fell. What? What is this? It's a list of therapists in Northern Virginia who accept state insurance, I said. And a list of job placement agencies for women re-entering the workforce. I don't need a job. I need my daughter, she screamed, the victim mask slipping. No, Mom, I said, my voice steady and calm. You need to save yourself. I can't carry you anymore. I have my own pack to carry. I turned away. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than combat, harder than the raid. To walk away from a crying mother requires a strength they don't teach you in basic training. But as I walked toward the parking lot, the weight on my chest lifted. I wasn't abandoning her. I was finally respecting myself. I got into my truck and drove. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove to a warehouse district near Dulles Airport. I pulled up to a large brick building. The sign out front used to say Morrison Global Logistics. That sign was in a dumpster somewhere. A new sign was being bolted up by 2 workers. It was simple, black and gold steel. Day Logistics. I parked and walked inside. The smell of stale cigar smoke and cheap cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh paint and brewing coffee. The abstract art was gone. In the lobby, hanging prominently on the main wall, was the portrait of Colonel Day. He was smiling, looking over the office he built, finally reclaimed from the thieves. "Morning, boss," a voice called out. I smiled. "Morning, Sergeant Miller." Jim Miller, a former Army Ranger who lost an arm in Kandahar, waved at me from the dispatch desk. I had hired him last week. In fact, I had fired Frank's entire staff of sycophants and replaced them with veterans. Men and women who knew about duty, who knew about logistics, and who had been cast aside by a world that didn't understand them. Frank had used this company to kill soldiers. I was going to use it to employ them. I walked into my office, Dad's old office. I sat in his chair. It fit perfectly. I looked at the stack of contracts on the desk. Legitimate contracts. No Chinese scrap, no bribes, just honest work moving supplies for the people who needed them. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a group text. "Mrs. Higgins, lasagna night at my place on Friday. Don't be late, Captain, and bring that nice Sergeant Miller if he's hungry. Grandma, I'll bring the pie and the bourbon." I laughed aloud in the empty office. It was a real laugh, deep and unburdened. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't a victim. I was a CEO. I was a daughter of a hero. And I was a member of the strongest family on earth, the one we chose for ourselves. I picked up my keys and walked out to the truck. The sun was setting, casting a long golden light over the Virginia hills. I rolled the window down, letting the wind hit my face. The war was over. The bad guys were in jail. The good guys had won. I put the truck in gear and merged onto the highway. I didn't know exactly where the road would take me next, but for the first time in my life, I was the one driving. And the view from the driver's seat was beautiful. Through this battle, I learned the most expensive lesson of my life, and it wasn't about money. It was about the true definition of loyalty. We are often raised to believe that blood is thicker than water, but I've realized that sometimes blood is just a biological accident. True family is defined by behavior, not DNA. Setting a boundary with a toxic parent, like I did with my mother, isn't an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Your dignity and your peace of mind are the most valuable assets you own. Protect them like a fortress and never apologize for locking the gate against those who only want to tear you down. Now, I want to turn the floor over to you. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to cut off a family member to save your own sanity? It is a heavy burden to carry, but often it is the only path to freedom. If my story gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, or if you simply enjoyed seeing justice served today, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about truth and resilience. Let me know in the comments below. Did I do the right thing by walking away from my mother, or should I have given her one last chance? I'll be reading your thoughts. Stay strong.